Good morning, everyone, and for many of you, good afternoon or good evening. My name is Jill Diffendahl, Academic Programs Administrator here at the Project Management Institute. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Ingredients of Successful Mega Project Management. This presentation is based on research that was funded in part by a PMI-sponsored research program grant. I'd like to start today's session with a few notes and reminders for the audience. This webinar is approximately 1 hour in length. It is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing on projectmanagement.com. Viewing this webinar counts for 1 PDU. PDUs are automatically reported for PMI credential holders. Please allow 7 to 10 business days for the PDU to appear in your member profile. If you have difficulties, please email communitysupport@pmi.org. After the presentation, the presenters will respond to questions submitted by the audience. If you have a question for the presenters, please enter it into the Q&A panel at any time during the webinar. We will address as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. To learn more about this research, you can also access the presenters' recent paper published in the Project Management Journal. This paper, What Are the Causes of Poor Mega Project Performance, is linked from this webinar's page on projectmanagement.com. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Giuliano Denicol is lecturer in project management at the School of Construction and Project Management in the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment at University College London. Giuliano's research explores the management of megaprojects through several lenses, emphasizing the design of client organizations and inter-organizational structures. His previous research has included several iconic UK megaprojects: High Speed 1, Heathrow Airport Terminal 5, the London 2012 Olympics, Crossrail, Thames Tideway Tunnel, and High Speed 2. His work on megaprojects has been regarded as high global impact, receiving research awards from the Project Management Institute, the International Project Management Association, and the Major Projects Association. Giuliano has received the prestigious 2019 Global Young Researcher Award from IPMA and the 2019 Best Reviewer Award from the Project Organizing Track of the European Academy of Management. Giuliano is a member of Project X, a major research network that aims to improve major project delivery in the United Kingdom, established by 9 universities in collaboration with the Infrastructure and Projects Authority and the Cabinet Office. He has worked as a supply chain management consultant at High Speed 2, the largest infrastructure project in Europe, and advisor to the European Commission on public procurement policies. Andrew Davies is the R.M. Phillips Freeman Chair and Professor of Innovation Management at Science Policy Research Unit, University of Sussex Business School. He is visiting professor in the Department of Business and Management, Luis Business School, Rome. He has previously held appointments at University College London, Norwegian Business School, and Imperial College London. His research over the past decade has focused on efforts to improve the delivery of megaprojects in the United Kingdom, including Heathrow Terminal 5, the London 2012 Olympics, Crossrail, and the Thames Tideway Tunnel projects. He has undertaken research and consultancy work for a wide range of international bodies, firms, and infrastructure clients. His published research has focused on how innovation occurs in large infrastructure projects and project-based firms. He has published in a range of leading management journals such as California Management Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and Organization Studies. He is the author of Projects, A Very Short Introduction, which was awarded the 2018 PMI David I. Cleland Project Management Literature Award. He co-authored The Business of Projects, Managing Innovation in Complex Products and Systems, and was an editor of The Business of Systems Integration. He is on the editorial board of several journals, including the Project Management Journal, the International Journal of Project Management, and Industrial and Corporate Change. He was a fellow of the Advanced Institute of Management Targeted Initiative on Innovation, and was awarded an IBM Faculty Award in 2005 to study services science in projects-based firms. Now, without further ado, I will turn over the presentation to Professors Davies and Denicol.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Giuliano Denicol, and I'll briefly introduce myself before handing over to Andy. As Jill kindly introduced us, I'm lecturer in project management at UCL, the Bartlett School of Construction and Project Management, looking at London's megaprojects through a range of different lenses and different theoretical understandings, but particularly focused on client organizations and how they are organized and set up to deliver those major programs and megaprojects. More recently, I accepted the position to lead the global Megaproject SIG from the IPMA, and there will be several interesting activities in a portfolio of research connected to that. Another interesting study that might be worth having a look at is the recent compendium of large infrastructure projects just published by the European Commission, where we looked at a range of more than 80 large infrastructure projects across 10 years on procurement policies and different procurement procedures. I'll hand it over to Andy now, and Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Giuliano. Just a little bit of background for me first. I was actually at UCL working with Giuliano and ES, who were co-authors on this paper that we're going to be talking about today. And I joined Sussex University on the 1st of October last year. So this study was done while we were all working at UCL, and I still collaborate closely with UCL as being an honorary professor there. But I'm taking the work forward at Sussex and focusing more on the real drivers for innovation and how innovation can improve the performance of megaprojects. And something that was mentioned earlier, I am the lead and principal investigator on this Project X project of at least 9 universities in the UK that are trying to develop research and an early career research capacity, looking at how to improve the performance of projects. So there's a little bit of background about me. Let's move into the paper. I'm just moving on. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is basically outlining, giving you the context for the research that we did. And as Jill was saying, it was funded by PMI, and it was in response to a call to look at megaproject performance. And we were influenced to some extent by Ben Fleetberg's work. There are many people who have noted the poor performance of megaprojects, and he and colleagues at the Saïd Business School talk about 9 out of 10 megaprojects failing to achieve their objectives in terms of cost and time and other outcomes. And in the Handbook of Megaproject Management, published by Oxford University Press, they talk about the need to understand the causes and the cures of megaproject performance. So we thought we'd do a literature review to really go deeply into what are the causes of poor performance and what are some of the cures. And we wanted to find out what the literature had to say about this. So in our presentation, Giuliano and I will talk about the context. I'll give you a little bit of background, some context for how we might think about this, look at the research questions, go through the methodology of a systematic literature review. So it's not just a regular read the literature and say what you think. There's a kind of a methodology, a strict methodology that we followed. We'll talk about our findings, draw some conclusions, and then talk about some avenues of research that we think might be really interesting in the future. So why megaprojects? These are just some of the trends here. There's an infrastructure gap. There's a real need around the world to develop and build and invest in infrastructure in developed countries like the UK, France, the United States, Canada, and so on. There is a real drive to improve what is actually quite often aging infrastructure that's in decline. And we've seen this particularly in London. The Victorian infrastructure of the tube, the underground system, and the roads and the networks and so on, and the railways linking into London are all in dire need of modernisation. And the delivery model for that are large megaprojects. So there's been lots of megaprojects. Some of the ones that we talked about or mentioned earlier, Heathrow Terminal 5 and Crossrail, are all big projects undertaken in London in order to modernise the infrastructure there. But this is going on all around the world. And actually what we see in developing economies like China and India, in particular in Latin America, you're seeing a tremendous growth in urbanization. Something like 300 million people will move to cities from the urban areas in China alone between around now and 2030. This is extraordinary. And so in those countries, they are building new infrastructure. They're building high-speed trains. They're developing airports and so on. And all of these are delivered as megaprojects. So we have a numerous amount of megaprojects going on all around the world. And yet we need to know more really about the different types of delivery models and so on of what is going on here. Okay. what is a megaproject? This goes back to some earlier work around the early 2000s. That it was defined originally as a large investment of over $1 billion or more. And you know, it's not a perfect measure, but at least gives us a sense that we're talking about large-scale projects, which are, you know, and others have used other terms like large engineering projects, major projects. But the really important thing here is to understand that these are very large, complex. They involve numerous components and interfaces and so on that have to be managed. They're one-off investments, and they are very uncertain. They're extremely high risk. So there's all these different dimensions that we kind of need to know about mega projects. And yet, if we look at the literature, it's actually quite fragmented. How do we, you know, when we look at the literature and we started to think about it, there's not that much which looks at mega projects as a whole in terms of their performance from the planning phase right through to design, construction, and handover and delivery. What you get in the literature is scattered, fragmented bits. There'll be something on the front end, there'll be something on contracts and risks. And so we wanted to kind of understand what are all the different dimensions that impact on performance and begin to think about this in a more holistic, integrated way in our literature review. Thanks. So the research question is, as I said earlier, what are the causes and cures for megaproject performance? And you know, the literature review really goes into this and explores, and Juliana will talk more about this in a moment. But we think it's really quite interesting because through the literature review, we began to understand that we need to think less in a fragmented way, but think about how all of these different dimensions that we've identified fit together in order to understand, you know, things that have held back performance and things that might improve performance. Okay. In our research, we identified 18 reasons why megaprojects fail, and there are up to as much as 54 preventative solutions. So we've really tried to probe deeply into the kind of the causes and cures of megaproject performance, and to really understand what's going on there. And Giuliano, over to you.
Right, okay, let's go through the methodology of a systematic literature review then. What we've tried to do is to recognize that megaprojects, it's a recent term in many ways. So if we go back to different adjacent literature on large engineering projects, major, grand scale, global projects, we have a range of synonyms that we could connect with the challenges and the dimensions of delivering such endeavors. And so the rationale was to connect synonyms of megaprojects with success and failure, which were equally unpacked in a range of synonyms and words that people actually use in literature to identify or to express failure and successes. So if you look at the list of synonyms for megaprojects that we covered, it's quite extensive. And we do recognize that sometimes it's covered by projects, sometimes programs, etc. Portfolio doesn't seem to be within the realm of megaprojects in many ways in the literature. It's more projects and programs, but you have a range of synonyms, giga, tera, etc., going way back to the 60s, post-war, etc. And so we try to capture all of those synonyms. So it is a very comprehensive list that generated a lot of outputs from the database searches that we'll go in a minute. Equally, success and synonyms were explored in several synonyms. The way we approached this, we developed this protocol. So systematic literature reviews were originally from the medical sciences, and they were used traditionally to aggregate knowledge about procedures performed at different places, where doctors needed kind of a robust method to understand and catalog, aggregate practices and move forward. So that is the rationale. And then over time, it transitioned to management and organization studies and project management. So it's quite a different method than just looking at the literature and reporting whatever you found. The protocol is developed to list of synonyms, etc., but also equally it's important to identify the main sources where you are searching for those papers or those scientific evidences. So we identified Scopus and Web of Science, or those two of the major academic databases, to search for those papers. So the synonyms were combined in search strings, and you can find more details in the paper, ultimately resulting in 6,007 papers, which were assessed and filtered down through several processes until we arrived in 86 full papers that we reviewed and qualitatively synthesized in terms of causes, cues, concepts, and themes to organize the literature and move forward. Another important topic to mention is that we aimed to connect with practitioners and academics. So we inserted deliberately steps to validate this methodology throughout our journey. So we validated the themes that we thought would be useful with a very senior industrial policy advisor. Later on, we validated, assessed and validated internally at UCL with academics from the School of Construction and Project Management. And also, and importantly, we validated externally through a workshop with leading scholars across the UK and Europe, and very senior megaproject practitioners from some of the most complex and challenging projects in London, such as HS2, Crossrail, and Hinkley Point C. So there was a debate to arrive in how best to disseminate those findings and move forward something useful and impactful to everybody, academics and practitioners. The way we structured, and there was a lot of debate on that until we arrived in this final solution. So we organized around 6 themes that would best represent the literature. Each theme is conceptualized. There are 3 main concepts connected with that theme. So breaking it down to actually disseminate the causes and cues. So it would be much better to connect each individual cause to a particular concept. So, and that is the way it goes forward. So we have 6 themes, 18 concepts connected to each theme, and each concept has a main cause, and then each cause is unpacked with 3 solutions. So in total, 18 causes and 54 solutions. This is an attempt, a deliberately attempt to move the conversation forward from a very pessimistic. We have fantastic authors in the literature covering solutions, but overall we found that the literature is very pessimistic on the causes and the problems of megaprojects, and not often providing solutions to both academics in terms of future research and practitioners. So what? That's the question that people would say. How do we move forward? If I'm a manager in a megaproject, how do I implement whatever you are proposing? So we focus on unpacking the solutions. So there is an attempt to have 3 times more solutions than causes in this paper. So that drives the whole conversation in the paper. Right, so that's the final diagram that you can see the organization and how it moves forward. Themes, concepts, causes, and cues. So it's all connected. So we organize in terms of 6 themes, and we'll go individually into each one of them, unpacking the causes and cues. So the first one, decision-making behavior. I'm just going to list them here. The second, strategy, procurement, and strategy, governance, and procurement. Risk and uncertainty, leadership and capable teams, stakeholder engagement and management, and supply chain integration and coordination. So now let's unpack each one of those themes individually. Decision-making behavior. So this is very much connected with a great deal of research in optimism bias, strategic misrepresentation, escalating commitment. There is a lot from Ben Flubjarg in this space, where actually if we have those concepts, it's very much biased judgment by experts who know everything about megaprojects, but they tend to be optimistic. So there are different pressures forcing decisions, and these things are too big to fail. So in terms of looking at those lines, we have 3 levels. The first level, we have number 1, level below, we have the concepts, and we have 3 concepts there. A level below that, we have the main causes, and then 3 solutions below that to each one of the causes. So optimism bias, strategic misrepresentation, escalating committee were found to be the main concepts connected with decision-making behavior. And then causes respectively on your right, associated with these three concepts, and then later on 54 causes. And here we have obviously three causes to each one of those, three cues, sorry, to each one of those causes. And there's no time, of course, to cover all the 54 solutions, cues that we found, but I'll try to highlight some of the cues and solutions in each one of the themes. So if we say optimism bias here as a concept, and the main cause connected to it would be biased judgments by experts, we would be looking at cues and solutions on strong benchmarking, plans for uncertainties, and tools to prevent those biases. And then we might actually recognize that many governments around the world are already implementing policy measures to prevent those biases in different ways. Equally, if we take escalating commitment as a concept, and it's essentially the main cause of being too big to fail or too costly to stop as a politician or someone in the promoter side of these mega projects, how do you stop a project after a while and spending billions of dollars, euros, pounds? How do you justify that expenditure if you are stopping the project without perhaps any benefit? Because you know it will fail later on. So it's very challenging, but needed. It's an action needed in many ways. So perhaps cues or solutions could go around options to defer and further assess risks, assess that political scenario and the many dimensions connected to governments who want to balance flexibility and control, and really invest in that pre-construction phase that could actually highlight many of the problems early on. Second theme on strategy, governance, and procurement. The three predominant concepts connected with this theme: sponsor, client, owner, and operator, governance, and delivery model strategy. So if we take the first one on sponsor, client, owner, and operators, often one of those parties are missing at the beginning of mega projects. So we have to recognize that they are often different organizations, the different terminologies, and more importantly, there are different roles and responsibilities to each one of them over time, right? So we tend to think in a very static perspective in projects and mega projects, when one of the features of these programs, they are long. So the longevity is one of the interesting parts where we need to consider how those structures, roles, and responsibilities move and evolve and are refreshed over time, over that very long period of time, and they might be refreshed several times, and we perhaps need to focus much more on that perspective in changing. So the main cause would be the definition and the evolution of those roles and responsibilities, and perhaps cues could be the clarity of promoter and provider and establishing informed organizations. That's essential in terms of, and there are different terminologies here. Some people use capable owners, intelligent clients, sophisticated, illuminated, all different sort of adjectives to classify what is capable, informed. So how do you build that capability within each one of those organizations over time? If we take delivery model strategy, for example, one of the main causes is that balance between in-house and outsourced capabilities. So we have perhaps the client side and the delivery side, and the supply chain side, and there is a balance between how much do you bring in-house, how many capabilities, and how do you assess that over time in connection with your sponsor organization as well, who is actually overseeing the whole mega project. So perhaps a discussion about integrated project teams would be very interesting at this point in time. How do you co-create value between client and supply chain at different points of the project? So early contractor engagement, recognizing that if you're perhaps a new client organization, you need to bring that capability from the supply chain. They know much better, since it's business as usual for them to deliver a particular product or service or solution in a very fragmented industry. So how do you bring that on board as a client in a way where you can organize and incentivize all of those parties? Moving on for theme number 3, in terms of risk and uncertainty. Here we have 3 predominant concepts on technological novelty, flexibility, and complexity. Going from technological novelty, the main cause seems to be the introduction of unproven technology. Sometimes mega projects are perceived by many parties in the multi-level structure that they are an opportunity to move forward industry, markets, whole countries and regions actually. So there is a huge temptation to introduce many novelties at different stages of that mega project, and that might be an interesting idea if used in a cautious manner. So there is a balance in terms of a solution for that. There is a balance between exploration and exploitation. How much do you explore in terms of new things, new solutions, new speeds, new boring techniques, etc. How much of that do you do, and how much do you maintain in terms of the stability and exploit what you already know over time? Avoid, of course, concurrency on novel technical design and all sorts of different things tested simultaneously. And one thing that might be very interesting and promising in the future is how do we improve the communication to enhance integration in light of digital technologies and all sorts of different technological platforms coming into play in construction, who is arguably behind other industries. Taking complexity as a concept, it seems the main cause for failure is the interaction or the impossibility of predicting beforehand the interaction between different parties, different dimensions over time. So we have a mega project with very fragmented industry, different players, different work packages, and it's not really possible to 100% predict the interaction and the dynamic between all of those parties, those moving parties over a long period of time. So solutions for that might be investing in modularization. Would it be possible perhaps to explore and exploit modularization, so maintain a core, stable, modular way of delivering mega projects and also expanding in less modular formats in other areas of the project? Invest in mutual adjustment strategies. So if we understand that it's complex, it's uncertain, it's long, it's all there, it's a given. There's no way around those dimensions, those features. So how about the inability of clients of predicting all of that, given those given features? Would it be possible perhaps to create and invest in those mutual adjustment strategies between clients and supply chain? So that would be an interesting way of removing the risk that will be there if we have a very adversarial relationship later on to solve whatever uncertain scenario that we might face in the future. And we will, for sure. Moving on for leadership and capable teams. So the three main concepts connected with this theme, it's around project leadership, competencies and capabilities. Taking project leadership forward, so the definition of a project culture, a sense of purpose, and the maintenance of that over time is hugely important. And senior mega project leaders are responsible for shaping that leadership and building the team over time. Therefore, it's essential as a solution for that to establish who the leaders are in a clear format at different levels of the mega project and empower those leaders. There's no sense in terms of having those roles just there if they don't have the empowerment, the support, the buy-in of senior leadership to make those decisions when needed. It's not clear where the boundaries are. Do they have permission or authority to make those decisions, to change the way their own teams and work packages work, or they don't really have that? So this confusion and lack of communication and clarity is often a huge barrier. Also, we found the project leadership is responsible for that reconciliation between different contrasting perspectives. Going back to the mutual adjustment strategies, we have to invest heavily on those collaborative frameworks. How do we engage those multiple parties with different interests, of course, at different points in time, and actually reconciling in an interesting and productive, valuable way to both parties? Taking capabilities forward, the main cause connected to capabilities, it seems to be that transition. We go back to longevity again. So there are different capabilities that might be supplied by different organizations across the supply chain at different points in time. And there are transitions from a client perspective. You might want to invest in learning between those phases, or even within a particular phase of mega project. How do you transition from the team that and the solution that one organizational firm is supplying you? How do you retain that organizational memory as a client and transition to the next work package? How do you manage the relationship between more permanent organizations and the temporary supply chains and networks that are formed to deliver across several phases? So that seems to be a very, very interesting topic for the future, so that transition of capabilities. Theme number 5, stakeholder engagement and management. The three predominant concepts here, we have institutional context, stakeholder fragmentation, and community engagement. It seems, and there are different examples all over the world in terms of engagement with community and different approaches and different outcomes achieved by countries where they try different strategies. If we look at the institutional context, it might be different to deliver, of course, a mega project in the UK, in Asia, in Latin America. The context seems to be very important, and particularly understanding the power relationships of that particular institutional context. Many organizations are delivering services in different countries, and sometimes the lack of understanding of those power relationships and the cultural aspects behind it provides a very challenging scenario which tends to fail, given that lack of visibility. So solutions for that, so there is an interesting stream of research in terms of corruption on mega projects. So how do we adapt our own strategies, perhaps from more mature economies, to apply them in developing nations to cope with another given characteristic that unfortunately many of those nations have, which is corruption? How do we minimize that impact of political influence, recognizing that there might be several electoral cycles during the life of a mega project? Different governments, different ideologies, they might have different priorities. They might want to change the scope of that particular mega project to address different issues in particular regions of the country. So that strategy to engage with government, to engage with a dynamic set of actors over time, it's quite important. Community engagement here, the main cause connected with failure in terms of addressing community engagement is that essentially communication with external parties. Often the technical core, the technical team of a mega project, they might not be so suitable to address an audience without technical knowledge, or they might not want to do that. They're not so willing to open up what they're doing. But we perceive that the outreach, the public outreach, is through marketing campaigns, suppliers, community engagement days. It's so important because you have that translation of the knowledge and the benefits being created, and you maintain a narrative promoting everyone that is actually doing the service. So you engage the supply chain as well in those adjustments to the community, and they will appreciate that very much. So they understand you're maximizing the benefits, you're creating and maintaining that awareness of the benefits, why we are doing this, why are we disturbing that community and perhaps removing people from that particular region, what's in for us, for our country. That is super important. And our last theme, supply chain integration and coordination. So we found here that there are three main concepts connected to this theme: program management, commercial relationships, and systems integration. If we take program management forward, sometimes we have a collection of projects within a mega project, which is organized as a program. So the interconnection between those projects it's very difficult to achieve over time. So we might sequence different projects and phases over time, and how they work together is quite challenging. So that visibility to be able to coordinate at program level is super important. And sometimes the lack of it causes many failures and missed opportunities around the project. So if we could have a solutions or invest more heavily in change management processes over that long period of time, information system for diverse data sets, moving forward, how do we bring different parties with different logics of organizing data? Would it be possible perhaps to provide a more central, coordinated manner of saying what we want, the structure we want for that data set, and actually using with new emerging technologies that plurality of data to make more informed decisions? And that goes back to involving the project/program controls team very heavily in that discussion. Unpacking systems integration, the main source of failure, and that's a very interesting area as well in terms of research, definition of future integration levels. Of course, systems integration has a huge connection with systems engineering, and there is a separate body of literature there. But sometimes there's a lack of recognition that we need to integrate beyond the technical space. So we need to integrate the technical assets later on with different layers of the organization. So there is a solution going forward on how do we work around the technical assets being produced perhaps across 40, 50 stations in a linear railway project perhaps, and how do we integrate that built asset with the organization that is developing or coordinating the client organization. So how the client is structured itself internally, different functions, how that client organization expands and engages with an inter-organizational layer with the supply chain, which is engaged and delivering different parts of the project in a fragmented industry, and external structures, external stakeholders, government, other parties. So how do you integrate systems, organizations, and institutions throughout different phases of a mega project? That seems to be super important, perhaps to use many of the techniques, tools and techniques well developed from systems engineering to integrate built assets and apply that in a more organizational perspective. And that is, of course, connected with the coordination and different frameworks to deal with this temporary and evolving supply chain, delivering the project in different work packages. So visibility is super important to coordination there. Overall conclusions based on that exploration of 6 themes. The mega project performance, perhaps we need to be talking beyond cost, unpacking what happens within each one of those mega projects. So the cost might be way over the initial target, perhaps, but there are interesting practices within that mega project that were super successful. How do we unpack? If we have a narrative only around cost, we are not unpacking the problems and the solutions and actually evolving, moving forward. So treating mega projects perhaps as a dynamic production system, and if we have different ingredients, different components of that production system, we might be able to unpack what went well and move forward, evolve. So the performance, in our view, is very much associated with a new understanding of different dimensions, all in different variables, if you like, all in play all the time in mega projects, how they interact together, how do we create new research methods to explore and understand more, but really moving the narrative around the solutions to particular parts of mega projects and moving forward. So the documentation of practices and the connection of those practices with the context is absolutely critical to the success moving forward. We have 5 avenues for future research, and I'm going to describe each one of them for you, and Andy will take over and explain how it's connected with the wider literature and moving forward. So I hope you will perceive in this picture that we have 5 lanes, 5 avenues, bridging the past and the future of mega projects. That's how we see the research and the conversation moving forward in a solutions-oriented, solutions-driven agenda, where we need to understand how do we actually deliver these things. We have 5 avenues here: defining the system architecture, bridging the gap with manufacturing, building and leading collaborations, engaging institutions and communities, and number 5, decomposing and integrating the supply chain. I'll hand it over to Andy, who will unpack each one of those with you.
Okay, thanks very much, Giuliano. I mean, one thing that I just wanted to add is that we had a workshop with leading academics in the UK and also leaders of some of the London's and other mega projects in the UK, Hinkley Point C, Crossrail, High Speed 2 and others, and Thames Tideway. And the idea was to present our findings, but also to sort of begin to think what are the key areas of research that need to be undertaken based on our findings. So these were the 5 avenues that we identified. The first one is really to begin to think, and Giuliano mentioned that we need to be, out of our research comes this view that let's start to think more about mega projects as a production system. Too often, as I said at the beginning, we have slightly fragmented views and perceptions of how performance could be improved if only we change the contracts, we change behaviours, more collaboration. But our research suggests that actually these things fit together holistically, systemically. And if you look at a mega project, it's actually a system of production with a sponsor who has a need, and that need has to be achieved in some way. There may be a client organization that's acting on behalf of the sponsor. The client may employ a delivery partner or a contractor or a joint venture to help deliver the project. And below that, you have very complex supply chains involving hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations. So there are real questions about the architecture, and there are different choices to be made. How much capability should the client have? What kind of client should we have? Should it be? Is the client a temporary organization, as in the Olympics, or is it a permanent organization that is doing multiple mega projects, like Heathrow Airport, for example, where they have to think in a more coordinated way about how they might learn from one mega project to another. And there are various forms of public and private organizational forms. Often in these mega projects, they are initiated by governments, and there may be a regulated or a public client and ultimately an operator of the whole thing that has to be arranged as part of the system. So there are multiple choices about how you design the system architecture. And thinking more about this thing, bridging the gap with manufacturing, a system of production, there's a kind of classic Woodward industrial organization going from any industry might be organized around mass production. But here we have an industry which is really organized around unit, one-off, or unique production. These are very complex, really major investments that have a different logic, and yet we can learn lessons from manufacturing. And I think we've seen this in the UK, but I understand around the world that there are, in mega projects, there are an interest now in modularity. Can we build modular nuclear reactors? Reduce uncertainty by doing so. Assembly to order, designed for manufacturing and assembly, bringing in digital technologies. And increasingly, there's an emphasis on artificial intelligence. So we see that supply chains, the system of production, is being digitized, it's being integrated, and we're kind of trying to learn lessons across industries. And I think more could be done on that to really improve the performance of projects. And now we're seeing also the other concepts like platforms, as well as modularity and things like that, becoming evident in the mega project world. The third avenue of research is building and leading collaboration. So leadership in teams is really key, and it happens and it cascades at different levels through a mega project. So you have the strategic team is running and dealing with the sponsor organization, trying to articulate, understand their requirements, and translate that into objectives and outcomes. But they will have moving down, a delivery partner or a joint venture or a contractor working with them to help them achieve that. And then you'll get the project broken down. But at each level, the sort of overall strategy level, program level, and even project level, there's a need for teams to work in a more collaborative and adaptive way. And the work of Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School is particularly interesting in this respect because she talks about the need for mutual adaptation. Increasingly we need leaders working in diverse teams, bringing different skill sets together to solve the kinds of complex problems at all levels that we're seeing in these mega projects. The fourth area is engaging institutions and communities. And here really, these production systems sit within complex national, institutional, and cultural contexts. Colleagues at Stanford University, Ray Levitt and others, have looked at global projects, and they've really honed in on this as a major issue because these mega projects bring together so many different bodies and organizations, often global in character, international in flavor. And it's actually, that raises all sorts of issues about how you build collaboration within these types of projects. But you'll see projects in places like in London, some of the ones we've looked at in London, there are lessons that can be applied to that context, but it may be difficult when transferring some of those models, that thinking, to other parts of the world, Africa, Latin America, or Asia. So the institutional aspect is very, very important. But the success of mega projects depends increasingly on how sponsors and promoters of those projects engage with the stakeholders who are impacted by the project. So this is a very important area of research, and increasingly colleagues are beginning to think about the importance of managing stakeholders, and this is a key element to the success of a project. And I remember seeing a diagram of the London Olympics, and there were literally 700 stakeholders that they put together on one slide. And that was the project was trying to manage all of those different stakeholders in various ways to actually successfully deliver that project. The fifth area is decomposing and integrating the supply chain. And this is really where, again, thinking of this as a system of production, this is a major systems integration challenge. And Giuliano mentioned that this emerged in the literature. But these are big systems that have to be designed with multiple components and subsystems and interfaces with the external world as well, and the stakeholders and so on. All of that has to be put together, integrated, and it has to be done from the design and the planning phase, through construction, to the integration of all the components and handover to operations. So how you decompose the whole supply chain and make sure that work packages and interfaces between them are carefully managed has always been important and will only become more important. Digital technologies and the role of data and how we can have a greater access to understanding these mega projects, maybe through digital twins and things like that, is becoming quite critical. But another component of this is also that mega projects are composed of so many different components, and some of them can be managed in a kind of fairly routine way with we've done this before, we can manage it, it's fairly predictable. But increasingly there are efforts to identify the really difficult parts of mega projects. So when the decomposing takes place, the bits that could potentially hold up the project, like putting together the signaling systems for Crossrail in London, for example, these have to be carefully planned from the beginning with the right contractual approach, which maybe shares the risk of solving problems that are highly uncertain. So we kind of need to think of mega projects as having various elements of sort of stability and high levels of uncertainty, and getting the right kind of structure in place with the right incentives and so on to deal with those varying degrees of uncertainty. And I wanted to say overall that really what we are getting at here is that increasingly we think that thinking of future research in the future, looking at mega projects as others have done when they studied the the car industry, automotive industry. The studies in the 80s by Dan Jones and Womack and others, which resulted in The Machine That Changed the World, published in 1990. They weren't looking at the industry in fragmented ways. They were looking at the performance of the car industry globally to try to understand what the features were holistically as an entire system. And they came up with the idea of lean, that Toyota and Honda and others have developed lean production. And increasingly, we think that studies of megaprojects will have to take a similar type of view. How are megaprojects organized from a systems point of view, in terms of their architecture, the production system, and how they fit together? And future research could really benefit from taking that kind of production system, complex production system perspective, to try to bring together some of the things that we talked about, which at the moment remain rather fragmented, and there's really a real need for more integrated thinking about the performance of megaprojects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy and Giuliano. That was a great presentation. We will now move into the Q&A segment of the webinar. We have about 10 minutes to answer some of the questions that have come in. I will start with one of the earliest questions that came in. How do you define poor performance in a mega project, specifically in discussion of the research? It seems that Love and Flubia have different definitions of what cost overrun might be. So how is that? How does all that tie into the definition of poor performance in a mega project?
Shall I just say a few words and then hand over to Giuliano?
Sure, absolutely.
Basically, because we were driven by systematic literature review, we didn't have to make that decision about what we think poor performance is. We were relying on the various and the body of literature that we were looking at, and it's defined in so many different ways. That takes us into the whole notion of what is success. Can you define it in terms of cost, time, quality? Obviously not and there's much more to consider in terms of the outcomes, performance of the asset in its life, whether it delivers value for the end user, and so on. But I think fundamentally we were looking at the literature. We let those that wrote their articles in the literature in the literature review decide what they felt performance is. Giuliano, do you want to add anything to that?
Just a little bit on poor performance versus cost. I think that there is a recognition of the fragmentation, similarly to what we have in industry, a fragmentation of suppliers and firms developing services and solutions. You do have a fragmentation in literature as well. So different groups, different research groups, different authors, they explore particular topics, which is super important in many ways, but that sometimes is disconnected from the whole system, from the whole mega project, from different variables. So we definitely don't think it's in a mega project which has the potential to shape regions, countries, etc. Cost, time, and quality, yes, it's important, but there is so much beyond that. Poor performance needs to be in the wider perspective as well. How about the benefits for communities? How about the benefits for the economy? How do we capture the social gains? How do we communicate that over time, over 30 years? It's much more a systems of systems perspective, perhaps. So how about the future investment or all the mega projects that doing that particular one will unlock for the whole country? So I think that there is much more out of this, and Andy is absolutely right on that. We were driven by the data, and that's the biggest advantage of doing a systematic literature review. It's something robust, scientifically driven in terms of getting the data and charting out those dimensions and how they might be connected with performance.
Thank you very much. Our next question is one I think is specific to the research you did, but I think applies to project management in general, and that is, how do you propose to improve communication?
I'll let Giuliano take that one first.
So the communication, I think we were talking about a multi-level approach for communication. So often mega projects will have an information management system, right, from a client organization, from a corporate structure, but there's so much more beyond the supply chain. So if we really unpack as an inter-organizational project, so we are understanding that the supply chain is actually delivering the project. Clients or different systems integrators are integrating and coordinating, but they're not delivering many of the products and the innovation connected to that. So perhaps Crossway was a good example. So they created an innovation strategy, and the flow of information was bottom up. So people had ownership of that particular idea. And maybe what we want to translate with improving communication is that recognition of different levels and how the information should be connected with different levels and across different firms.
I mean, it can take on so many different aspects. It's a very interesting question. So, it links into leadership, how you work in teams, how you share knowledge, about, between the supply chain and the client and the delivery partners. All, communication runs through all of this, and it's absolutely essential.
Absolutely. We also have a couple of questions asking about the difference between mega versus large project management. And do you feel like some of the problems and solutions you've identified in your research would also be applicable to large projects?
I mean, the short answer is absolutely yes. And, much of what we talk about is, this is a question of scale, and these are particularly difficult because of their scale and challenging. But many of the arguments that we've talked about will apply to, smaller scale projects. Maybe not, very small, but kind of certainly, it's a bit of an arbitrary cut-off point, 1 billion, and most researchers recognize that. But, it does at least signify the kind of the challenges involved when you've got such large numbers of suppliers involved, and you've got relationships, complex strategic relationships between sponsors and clients and their various bodies representing them in the supply chain. So yes, the short answer is this will apply to many types of projects, but we just kind of focus in on the largest scale.
If I could add a little bit on performance versus cost as well. So if we take 1 billion plus as a definition of mega project, so if we unpack, what does it mean, 1 billion? So perhaps, of course, it's connected with scale, with the volume of operations needed to deliver a mega project. But how about projects in a very remote location? Let's imagine a project in a developing nation in Africa, where it's a completely different context than delivering 1 billion project in New York or London or Paris. So you have different dimensions, even to have people there, to build a team, to have resources, to have firms, suppliers, etc., to build a market. So I think unpacking what do we mean by a mega project. So that could be a mega project and the cost could be way below 1 billion, just because we have all the dimensions. So if we translate that rationale to performance in mega projects, that's what we want to unpack. So really talking about the solutions, connecting to causes, problems, and the solutions to those dimensions, those variables.
Okay, we'll wrap up with one last question, and I think this is very timely for the current global situation. Do you see the movement, especially around mega projects tied to urbanization, do you see that movement slowing with lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the ability to work remotely and seeing how that might be reflected in fewer infrastructure projects needed, especially around office buildings and things like that?
Do you want me to go first, Juliana? I'll just say a few words about that. I mean, COVID-19 is a kind of what we all know as it's an unknown unknown. So it's really difficult to know how to prepare for that and how long-lasting some of these some of the implications are for projects. But it's clear it's certainly accelerated certain things that kind of were about to happen and maybe should have happened earlier. So often there was a real opportunity for certain forms of remote working, for use of the kind of all technologies we're using now to share and meet and so on. But there's issues here around how you design and build, organize to deliver mega projects, but also the outcome. The mega projects we were talking about were the reconstruction of cities and so on. But if cities are going to be redesigned in any major way because of the implications of COVID-19, you're also you're organizing to produce a different outcome. It all is shrouded in uncertainty, and it's going to be interesting to see how it kind of accelerates certain trends that, like perhaps the digital aspects of mega projects we were talking about may be accelerated now because of it. But it's difficult to predict exactly what will happen.
Just to add a point on that, all countries now, post-COVID, they are talking about an infrastructure wave, a big wave of investment in infrastructure. So it's not going away. If we correlate that with increasing population and increasing urbanization over the next decades, we will have mega projects. That's a given. We need to be able to deliver them better. So they're not going away. Perhaps what will change with COVID and perhaps other uncertainties in the future is the way and the priorities that we use to drive our ways of organizing to deliver those projects. How about climate change? How about the environment? How about other future issues, very much now, but looking to the future? How do we address those emergencies as well while delivering those mega projects to provide the population infrastructure and better conditions?
And I think absolutely it's very uncertain and something we'll continue to see evolve, but large projects, mega projects are probably not going away.
No, absolutely. They're here to stay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That is all the time we have for questions, unfortunately. But I want to thank you both, Andy and Giuliano, for taking the time today to present your research. For those of you in the audience who have been watching live, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on projectmanagement.com, so you will be able to revisit the webinar on demand once the recording has been posted. And we encourage you to leave feedback by rating the presentation and leaving a comment. So thank you again to our presenters and our audience for participating in today's webinar, and have a wonderful day, everyone.